Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on mobile media. We have our world famous speakers, Mr. David Schumacher and Mr. Donald. First, I would like to give chance, Mr. David Schumacher, what you want to discuss about this mobile media and what you want to share with our audience, especially, right now we are in South Asia. People are big fan of Bollywoods and Hollywoods and many interesting things. So, what is the future of mobile media?
Well, excellent way to introduce the question, I think, about the future, because that's what I normally really like to focus on. Future opportunity, especially entrepreneurial opportunities. But I must confess, Sharif, that when I saw what the topic was, it made me reminisce a bit. It made me think of history, which actually is another interesting area of mine, or an area that I find interesting, I should say. So it got me thinking about mobile media. Today, it's everywhere we look. And the future going forward in mobile media, I think, is open ended, and we'll come back and talk about that. But I want to kind of flip back a few pages and go back to my first introduction to mobile media was many, many years ago, matter of fact, decades ago. And it all started out in the domain of paper. The mobile media that I first grew up with was books and magazines and things of that nature, things that I could pick up and take with me. I was one of those people that had a book or a magazine in my back pocket, and when I had some idle time, I would take that with me. And so that was mobile media of the day. Now, mobile media also then transitioned from paper. Paper didn't go away, but it opened up into the area of broadcast. I remember talking to my parents about how exciting it was for them. Both of them lived in different states on farms when they were children. And when they both got their first radio in the household, that was a really exciting thing. They had something that was more immediate than, say, newspapers, which the news cycle in those days was well outside of the 24-hour cycle that we see now. And radio brought it more into a 24-hour cycle where once a day they would be able to gather and listen to news and maybe some entertainment. And it wasn't necessarily mobile at the time, these were big boxes. But by the time I was a kid, along came transistor radios that I could put in my shirt pocket and stick an earplug in my ear and listen to whatever it was kids my age liked to listen to back then. And that was really exciting because otherwise it was radio or TV at home. TV was the other big broadcast medium. And of course, you had radio in cars. But even when I was a kid, that was just AM radio only, so very limited. But nevertheless, you can see there's a transition here going from paper and then adding broadcast. But fast forward another decade or two, and we come into the electronic, what I would call the electronic area of media. So it's about the time that laptops came in and some special purpose devices like video players came in. And you could actually lug these around. I remember going on business trips and taking my laptop with me. And there was no streaming, of course, but you could get compact discs or later DVDs and maybe watch movies or do something of that era. And then there was the home equipment, and that all attached through television. So television was still a central part of this. But then a big breakthrough came along, and it is the smartphone. If Edward Hudgens was here, he'd hold up his smartphone and talk about it. I've seen him do that many times. So since he's not here, I'll steal from him a little bit and talk about how the smartphone has taken what was done before in paper and done before on broadcast and brought it down into a single device. And then with streaming, once more, we had even much more mobile media. But now I've got a device that I can stick in my pocket that's actually smaller than the magazine or book that I used to carry around. And now I can have multiple books and multiple magazines and access to all kinds of the entertainment and news that I grew up with as a kid. But it didn't stop there, of course. I think the big revolution these days is not so much in hardware or even the style of getting the information to you, but it's what social media has brought online. Social media has tied perfectly, I believe, with smartphones to be able to allow you to customize your sources for news, for good or bad, customize your sources for entertainment, good or bad, but nevertheless, it's allowed you to do that. And it's allowed not only to be a receiver of in the smart media space, but to be a broadcaster. I can now set up and do like what we're doing and take this media, put it on YouTube, and people can watch it at any time. They can watch it live from their smartphone or from any other type of mobile device or any device from that matter. And this has really opened up both sides of it, not only the receiver of information, but to be able to deliver information. When desktop publishing showed up on the PC world, I thought that was really great because that allowed people to be able to build their own newsletters and so forth much more effectively. But things like TikTok, things like YouTube, and all the variants that go with all of those has really opened it up to just about anybody to not only be a consumer but to be a supplier in this mobile media space. Now, back to your original question, where's it going to go? I don't know for sure, but I strongly suspect that augmented reality and virtual reality will play a part in this, and it'll be another bit of a paradigm shift. At first, all this media was aimed at us, and then with smartphone technology and so forth, we were able to inject back into that space. Come augmented reality and virtual reality, we're going to be able to immerse ourselves in this space. We're going to actually be able to take ourselves into the world of the news and into the world of entertainment. And who knows where it'll go from there. But I'm sure it'll be exciting, and I'm sure there'll be entrepreneurial opportunities. And I'll leave it from there so Donald's got something to say. I want to hear his comments. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. David Schumacher, for your excellent speech. Now I request Mr. Donald.
Well, David covered some of the same history that I've been through. Um, I'm in, I think it's interesting to think about how disruptive mobile media has been throughout history. When Gutenberg invented the printing press in 1440 or whenever, about when it was, it really didn't have much effect on anything for a very long time because it was extremely difficult to print things with it. And the only thing they printed for a long, long time was Bibles. And so that was it really, but it did make a difference because before then, how did people learn about the Bible? It was just they would go to church, and the learned people who had copies of Bibles would read it to them, and so it allowed more people to be able to learn to read. It allowed it to be able to. It allowed people to start making their own interpretations of it, and that ultimately caused the church to start with Protestantism and some of the different interpretations of the Bible that led to different religions and lots of wars. But which is interesting. I mean, that's a point. It's very disruptive. I mean, just simply the fact that people could have different copies of the Bible led to a huge amount of fragmentation within the world. But couple hundred years later, people started writing this romantic poetry and things like that people could read that were a little more, that were more escapist. And around middle of the 1600s, this guy Cervantes wrote the first novel, Don Quixote, which I would recommend to anybody to read. It's just delightful. It's an incredible book. In fact, I think I might reread it just because it's such a good book. And it's there's if you're reading it in English, there's multiple translations, and more modern translations try to be less accurate for the words that they use and more the spirit of what he is, and they make it more it's much easier to read. It's very delightful. So anyway, that's an aside, but that started a whole incredible thing of people starting to write fantasy stories about things that were possible. And so and people could share these other realities that they were creating with each other through the printing press. And that changed the world in ways that we can't even imagine. But I do have a story about how the world was changed by mobile media, though, that I know I've read about, and I also had a friend who was a professional musician who started when she was 16 years old. She was born in 1915, I believe. I met her when she was 85 and was good friends with her till she passed away at 101. And she told me lots and lots of stories of the music business and movies in her life as she grew up, and the changes that media made to society and to her life as a musician. And it's fascinating. She told me that she remembered when she saw the jazz player, I think it's called. There was a first movie with sound that was made. And she was so excited, she wrote a letter to her parents, and then she said, "Little did I know that would be an end to our whole way of life." And what she did up until that, until movies came along, is that the popular entertainment in America was dancing. And so they had basically, what she would do is she would work in vaudeville, which was entertainment, where they had comedians and other kinds of things. And her band would come out. She was in an all-woman dance band that traveled all over the United States. And her band would come out and play like 3 songs. And then they'd go and change their costume and come out later and play 3 more songs. She said she didn't really like that much, but what she really liked was going to the dances. And people would ride in their, Model Ts and horse and buggies and stuff like that for 50 miles, 100 miles to come to these dances. And musicians made pretty good money in those days. So the popular music of America was jazz. And jazz was music you danced to. So we call it swing, basically, because it's jazz that has a rhythmic beat that you can dance to. Now, jazz kind of evolved into something that's more abstract often, and it's hard. It's sometimes very hard. You can't really dance to it, but so anyway, what happened was, she was telling me a story about how she was going to a gig, and there were some other musicians in the train station. She recognized them because they had their, musician cases and, their instrument cases and so on. And she said, "Well, we're going to such and such theater." And she said, "Well, haven't you heard it's gone dark?" And by going dark, what that meant was that they had switched to movie format from vaudeville format, because it was much more expensive to pay a band of musicians and, entertainers and things like that. So once movies came out, the whole thing musicians being able to make a living and entertainers being able to make a living by going to these circuits. My grandmother did that too. She was on the I forget the name of it. She was an entertainer that traveled around, and that whole thing just ended. I mean, just in a matter of months. And so digital media is a that's a case where, I mean, it was or sorry, not digital media, but mobile media. The movie reels that they could send around changed everything. And another story that's interesting and similar is that after that, for quite a while, all the way up until the early 50s, dance bands were still doing well. Okay, and dancing was a good musician at the dance band for something like Benny Goodman or um, some of the Artie Shaw, some of the great swing bands would be very well paid. That was a kind of a prestigious job. They were very much admired. They'd play at Carnegie Hall. They'd play it. It was a good job, and so we had in the United States really, really, really good musicians. It was a special time, and and then what happened was that the long playing record came out, and up until then, records were 78 records, which is the speed that they turned, and they were small. They were big records, but they could only hold like 3 minutes of music. About they were very short. They could hold one song, and that wasn't really enough for somebody to dance to dance to for at a club. You needed it to be longer, and so when the LP came out, the same thing happened as what happened in the movies. LP means long playing record, and the dance clubs started to just switch and not hire bands anymore and just play long playing records. It also her band and other bands would play on the radio, and the radio also dropped playing bands. So literally in a matter of months in the early 50s, all of those bands just disbanded. They all broke up. The entire industry changed overnight because of mobile media. And it's kind of interesting. So when we talk about, and then as David pointed out, there, you know, some of the evolutions have we come up to social media, and I'm going to let other people talk and get back to this if I get a chance again later. But what I was saying is that when you're thinking about this, it's really interesting to think about how much these things change our world. I mean, you know, nowadays, you know, being a musician is a very, very dicey job. I mean, it's not, you know, we think of musicians as these people who, you know, make records and, you know, fill coliseums and stuff like that because, you know, what's the middle ground? You can't go around and play musician, you know, earn a living playing at clubs or anything like that. There's nothing there. It's gone. And so when we're thinking about how mobile media is affecting working, it's really interesting to start thinking about how not just the physical media itself, but how the introduction of that media can change society overnight. And and I think that's what I'm going to say for now, and then I'd like to listen to what other people have to say.
Thank you, Professor David J. Kelly. I'm very much fan of your work. Very interesting thing. In Bangladesh, we are working with Energy Ministry. I think Boston Consulting Group also provide consultancy to Bangladesh Energy Ministry. We are discussing many interesting projects with Buet. So hopefully all of your contributions can bring more interesting issues. Uh, but today we are discussing about mobile media, and you know, especially South Asia, they are really, really big fan of Bollywood and Hollywood, and they are looking for new technology. So what the new technology will help this industry. Mr. David J. Kelly.
Well, so which industry in particular in
Uh,
Southeast Asia?
Southeast Asia, definitely we are discussing about media. So,
Right, right.
we
But
have a big industry called, it's called Bollywoods. It's really, really big. So, yeah.
well, I would say in that community, it'll make it a lot easier for artists to publish. Like while I'm a computer scientist, I'm also used to be a professional musician. At least I was for a year. And see, I still have my clarinet right here, for when I practice now and then. But the whole thing is I can't necessarily make a living with it. But given today's technology and the evolution of the technology, it's pretty easy with your iPhone, or some pretty primitive, or not primitive. Primitive isn't the right word. Some pretty basic equipment. Just my iPhone, I can record and mix and do things that is just unbelievable. 50, 60, 100 years ago. So as an artist, I think it, even though I need to have a real job, because musicians don't really make a whole lot of money. Um, even
Yeah,
my
musician make.
well, even as a professional musician for a year, the only reason that happened was because of a special assignment with the U.S. Navy. And if I hadn't been in the military with another job, I would never have been able to even try to do that to begin with. Never mind trying to be a popular musician. I mean, like my children tend to be musically inclined. My daughter was dancing before she could walk, and my son is won national gold medals in ballroom dance, competitive ballroom dance, and competes in the open divisions in swing with other professionals. But you can't make a living doing that. I mean, you might be able to be a dance instructor, but you're going to live in the poorhouse the rest of your life. And sadly, that's how things are. But my point is, mobile media in general enables artists to still be artists and to produce amazing quality work and share it with the world. It's not like if you're in some little village in Bangladesh or something, I can have a phone and I could put together some just amazing media. I've seen, I actually have a friend that used to be a TV producer, I believe. He lives in Bangladesh actually, and mobile media has enabled him to just change his life from when I first knew him to now. And I've seen little bands from all over Asia that have, well, one in particular I'm thinking about that with an iPhone they're able to produce almost professional quality material. And so I think mobile media or mobile technology in general is really an enabling technology, no matter who you are, wherever you are in the world.
Excellent. Mr. Markley, you are
A
from
couple of
media.
things. A couple of things about mobile media as I was listening to the conversation that crossed my mind. One, I would slightly disagree with something that Donald said, and yes, it is a difficult field to go into music, but you can make a living in music. I actually have several friends that is their career. Now, some of them may be supplementing it with their college education and some of their also college training and college jobs, because there are some of the musicians that I know that are teaching musicians, so they are making a living both in the musical field as well as being a professor. So they actually have two streams of income in that sense and all along those lines. But they do quite well. John Brown, who is actually the head of the Duke department over here and everything, he actually has a couple of bands, and of course he is the head of the entire Duke Arts system and all, and he makes a pretty good living. I mean, he's also a lawyer as well, so they will sometimes have other jobs. I've got a friend of mine that is a funk musician, and he is definitely playing gigs. As a matter of fact, he'll be going this weekend to the Funk Ball, which is taking place up there in Maryland. And so it'll be taking place in Maryland, and he's one of there are several bands playing. It's not his band playing, but a person's band that is playing is plays in his band and he plays in their band is what I'm trying to say. So they mix into each other's bands, and he'll be going up there on Saturday to perform and all along those lines. And of course, a lot of times musicians, just like many other people, have to have their side gigs, whether that's Uber, whether that's DoorDash, whether that's Grubhub, whether that's a number of other things, maybe even working as a receptionist or something along those lines. And we do know that the success rate, so on that part, I will agree with Donald and you, David, as well, that the success rate is not all that high. I mean, there are those that will make it in terms of being totally successful. We talk about like the big stars and all of that. It is a minimal percentage of it's not even a full percent. It's like less than a percent that will be successful in that sense and all along those lines. I mean, you're only gonna have a few Beyoncé's, a few Janet Jacksons in the world, a few Bruno Mars in the world, and all of that are making, in the millions and all along those lines. But yes, you can make a living whether you're doing the festival circuit, whether you're doing the club circuit, whether you're doing a number of other circuits that do still exist here in this area. And yes, mobile media can even help you get those engagements, because a lot of times you might even be using the mobile media and mobile apps to let folks know where you are performing at, because that is one part of mobile media is the mobile apps, and a lot of the artists are using mobile apps to let folks know where they are performing at and how they are performing, and so that their fan base can get to them. So that's just one form of mobile media that the folks in the media are using as well. And as for David, I agree, ballroom dancing is a very difficult field, but that is one that is very much a fun one. I had a friend of mine that worked at the Arts Council. I think she's still there, and she was involved in that space and would go to different competitions. And I think she did quite well in those competitions. I need to check with Margaret and see if she's still in that circuit, because she's definitely getting up in age, just like all of us are, and all of that. So she may have stopped doing it, but she was very competitive and did quite well in that space. But it is not one that you're going to get a lot of money at. But, even in that field, there are exceptions. I don't know how many of y'all are familiar with the dancer Misty Copeland, but Misty Copeland is making some pretty good money as a dancer and all along those lines. But definitely she's done performances, I think, with like the New York Ballet and a number of other companies around the world. But that is the exception and not the norm. So I would definitely say that there are opportunities there in the mobile media and in entertainment in general. And yes, you are right. There have always been changes in the industry. I think that you brought that up, Donald, and we've seen the change in the way that radio went from definitely having a lot of bands that would come and perform to that doesn't always happen. But even in small community radio stations and in some of the pirate radio stations, they do still invite bands to come by and perform. There might be a small group or something along those lines. But one of the stations I work at, WCON, I know that they do that on a pretty consistent basis and all along that time frame and everything. So yes, there are ways that you can make money, and I do agree that a lot of people are using that little small thing, namely the phone, to make a lot of music and everything, because that is a very powerful tool that we all have at our disposal. We've seen it used to capture horrible things in the world, like some injustices and things of that nature. But we've also seen, as David alluded to, people that are using that little phone and the things that are in it, along with different apps, whether that's Voice Wave or some of the other ones that are out there, to create some very successful records that can get out there. You can upload it into your YouTube. You can upload it to a number of other spaces. So yes, we can use the phone, and we can use some of those programs that exist in order to get the music out to a greater audience and everything. I know a number of musicians that love using GarageBand and all along those lines. So there are tools that can be used to get the music out there. And definitely that is something that I'm seeing more and more people using, whether they're living in Bangladesh, whether they're living in New Zealand, or whether they're living in even some of the nations on the African continent and around the world and all of that. So, I mean, a lot of the musicians, of course, want to go to a nicer studio just because they get all the toys and whistles, bells and whistles at the studio. But you can do a lot of that before you go into the studio using your home technology and all of that. That same musician I was talking about, my friend Zach, that is a funk musician, he definitely goes into the recording studio to record his record, and one of the songs is done quite well and all of that. But some of the earlier preliminary stuff he recorded at his home, and even during this time of the pandemic, we saw people that were in totally different parts of the world that would use mobile media and would use other communication tools, including Zoom and other things, to get tracks to each other, even though they were not in the same places. I mean, during this time, we've heard of a lot of collaboration projects where one person might be in Japan, the other person might be in Brazil, and one person in one of the states in the United States, and then they would create a sound and a kind of a record or something like that that they would get out to the public. So definitely, I think that mobile media is something that is very much used and is being used quite effectively by the world community, and particularly the world artistic community. And the other thing that you didn't allude to, but a lot of people are using that also, and then I'll land the plane with that, is a lot of folks are getting into NFTs, which is another form of putting their music out using mobile media, because some of these NFTs are also being created through the phone and some of the other mobile media outlets. And that is, in a lot of ways, what the musicians, the artists, and others in the creative field are using to eliminate some of the middlemen. They don't always want the middleman in the midst of what they are doing. They don't want to have to deal with the agents or the managers or things along those lines. They want to have a direct line directly to the customer and in that space. But that's just some of my thoughts around mobile media that came from the conversation that I was hearing from the other gentleman.
Thank you. Mr. David Schumacher. Uh, what are the new technologies actually help us, especially for this mobile industry? Yeah.
Well, to answer that question directly, before, and then I want to go back to something else as well. But to answer that question directly, I think that will be improvements in smartphone technology and excuse me, and an extension to smartphone technology, like smartwatches, for example. Smartwatches allow uh, the ability to be able to have a quicker personal turn cycle with the information. So, for example, a local television, there's two television stations here in Phoenix that are owned by the same company. And one of them is a network affiliate, one of them is not, specializes in local news. So you see some diversity there. I think that is something that points to the future, but they've gone beyond that. They've done the traditional, by today's standards, web page to put up and to have different information to follow, but they've also created apps. And in those apps, they create short news stories that end up coming out that I can view from my smartwatch. So instead of, on the news cycle, instead of just sitting down once a day to watch a television news broadcast, I can go ahead and not only look at the web page whenever I want, or turn to the local news channel, which is kind of like a 24-hour news source, but I can look at my watch when I get pinged about items that are of specific interest to me. And I think that's something that's new. And that's, of course, very mobile. Wherever I'm at, I can take a glance. If it's of particular interest, I can touch my watch and bring up the news story. And then I can also look to see where there might be more expanded information elsewhere. So I think this whole idea of integrating source, content, and distribution is definitely a step towards the future. And I'd already mentioned about the interjection of what I think augmented reality and virtual reality will play into this. It will take us from being outside the story to being able to go inside the story and perhaps even participate in the story to some degree. So these are interesting areas that perhaps can be exploited by those with innovative and entrepreneurial mindsets. Now, I want to go back to a question I've heard you ask a couple times. What can we do in Asia Pacific with some of the technology that we have today and technology that may be emerging? And my answer to questions like that usually start with, what are the pain points? If I was in Malaysia, I'd be looking at what people enjoy and then what people complain about. Because what can people complain about is your opportunity. Is there an opportunity there to be able to take pain away from whatever it is that they're doing? Maybe that's in licensing and distribution. Maybe you can't get it to all the source outlets that you want. Maybe there's a business to be made. Maybe there's an opportunity there, or to join an opportunity that helps in this licensing and distribution in the mobile media space. Or maybe it's more fundamental. Maybe it's infrastructure. You've mentioned about infrastructure is pretty good in the major cities in Malaysia, but what about as we move out into the countryside and so forth? There's pain points there. Is there a way to be able to provide a service and to capitalize off of that? And I'd already talked about integration, and I think integration, if it's not being done between television, radio, website, uh, apps, and apps that play to smart devices, and the next smart device after the smartwatch will be augmented reality glasses, where I don't even have to look down at my watch. I can follow that news story simply by looking into my glasses. So I think there's definitely some room for opportunity there, but it all starts with what the pain points are. Identify those, and then see if there's a solution and then a business model that can support it. So that could be pretty exciting. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you. Mr. Donald, you know that we are actually developing a research lab in different universities and different cities in South Asia. So when we working with different universities, they are more interested about VR and AR and VR and AR applications. I think as we're discussing about media, and Mr. David Schumacher bring this point, this VR and AR. So if you share some of your thoughts, especially on the opportunities of VR and AR, it may be helpful for our audience. Yeah.
I don't really have
Mr.
any
Donald.
thoughts about VR or AR. I don't really. I've never used it. I've never met anybody who's used it, so I just don't really. I've never. I don't. I've read about it, but it's nothing that anyone I know has ever used, or so it's not. I've read about it, but it's not something I know much about at all. So I'm not a good person for that. Um, I. I will say I want to say that learning to be a mus that I'm not saying that learning to be a musician isn't a great thing. I'm a musician, and I guess in a sense I'm a professional musician because I've gotten paid for it. And when I told you about my old my friend that died at 101, I was in her band for a while, and she taught me a lot. And so, but as but but as you pointed out, real musicians have day jobs. I mean, he pointed out one was a lawyer, one was a university professor, and all the musicians I know that have been able to just totally do music do it because they also have developed teaching videos, all kinds of instructional stuff at the same time, which is great because mobile media allows them to do that. They instead of just sitting around their living room teaching juvenile delinquents, they wind up they can make these videos and streaming things that go out to everyone, and they can do quite well doing that. I also want to add that one of my very favorite movies, maybe my very favorite movie, is Searching for Sugar Man, and it got the jury prize and the audience prize at Sundance, and it won the Academy Award for Best Documentary. So it did very, very well. It was very acclaimed. It's a very upbeat and wonderful movie, and it was basically made on an iPhone. The guy he recorded it on an iPhone, and to get the effects and paid in, he used his iPhone and filmed his computer screen. So he basically did the entire thing with his PC and his iPhone, and it won all of those awards. It was a amazing accomplishment. So, but then back to the thing. I mean, Bollywood's doing great. I mean, the question is like, what can you do for people that makes them, I mean, it's, keeps them interested and makes them interested. And the movie people have gotten so good at that, that Bollywood has gotten so good at that, that, they're people in Hollywood study Bollywood because they make these wonderful upbeat movies that everybody just loves to watch. I mean, the media is part of it. An interesting, I want to say one thing that's just happened in the last 10 years or so. Musicians used to be able to make money selling CDs. And since streaming has come along, Spotify and Amazon Music and so on like that, nobody buys I won't say nobody, but the sales of CDs have just gone to very, very small. And so what they do is they get a teeny percentage of everything that people listen to. So my musician friends that used to sell CDs tell me, they say, well, I just can't wait. I'm going to get my $5.22 check from Spotify, or $1.12 check from Spotify, the amount that they're making now. And again, it's interesting that that avenue of social media is kind of pushing some of the avenues out. But as David pointed out, I think on the other hand, there are people who've gotten on YouTube and made them become huge stars. Annie Franco was the first one that did that. She wouldn't go through record companies. She did, Addie DeFranco. She did it all on YouTube, and she got very big. And I just looked now at the top YouTube stars, and they can monetize their audience and do quite well, very, very well. But again, how do you know how to do that? I mean, David Schumacher's formula seems useful, but I think there's a lot of knowledge in marketing that you can use, focus groups and things like that. I know one personal story that I'm just going to end with, which is that once I had a tweet that went viral, and it had 24,000 retweets, 3.1 million views, and 170,000 likes. So that counts as viral. That's up there. And I have absolutely no idea how and why that particular, it's similar to my other tweets. It wasn't that much different than anything else I tweet. And I have absolutely no idea what that happened. I mean, it was just, if I could figure it out, I'd be richer than Bill Gates, I think, but nope. And so I think that there's a lot of trial and error in all of this too. So the wonderful thing about it is that we all have this wonderful technology at our fingertips, and it's not that expensive relatively. I mean, back in the old days, I mean, even when I was a kid, to buy a sound mixer was thousands of dollars, but now you can just get an app that's a fabulous sound mixer for $1. And the ability that you have to be able to make incredible stuff on your own it's insane. And so as an individual, just go for it because you can. And as a country, and use the channels that you have. Use YouTube. Use TikTok is like the best. I mean, I love TikTok. I spend a half an hour a day on TikTok at least every day. I love it. So use the channels that you have, and it can work even for. Yeah, it works for anybody. So that's, I think, an important thing that, even a low-income country, everyone can make incredible things. So that's what I have to say.
Professor David Jekali, what are the interesting technological innovation, especially for VR and AR, you want to share with our audience? And I know that even World Talent Economy Forum, we have our lab. We start our lab, so different young peoples, even the Bollywoods, many important producer, they are also show their interest how they can make NFT, VR, and AR, and how does it work? What is your guideline for our audience?
Well, I mean, there's not just one way to make things work. There's all kinds of ideas. I think one of the coolest things that probably will get people noticed is when you come up with ways to blur the line between reality and the digital world, uh, and with AR. And the thing is, you don't need a headset or a bunch of fanciness to do AR. Look at a great example is the game Pokemon Go on your phone. You know, you can switch it and chase those Pokemons all over the place. You know, it's like you're holding up a mirror to the world, and there's the Pokemon right there, but you can only see it with the phone. You know, another example I was playing with recently. I wish I had the cards here. I just put them in the other room actually, but um, there's a popular game, Dungeons and Dragons. It's a role playing game, and there's a company with a product where basically it's a card, and you raise your phone, you hold your phone over it, and it picks that up, and then it a 3D model of whatever is the card shows up on your phone that you could look at and show other players and help add interactive elements to the game. And the thing is, technology like that is all over the place. You know, back when I was doing a lot of R&D with Microsoft, one of the things, so we did this bar right in Chicago where you could put your drink on the bar, and the bar would like light up around your drink, and there would be little bubbly things, and you could press the bar and a little menu would pop up to order stuff, and the system could tell if your drink was low and that sort of thing. And being able to, you know, build apps where maybe you use a QR code where someone can just scan it, but you could have an app that actually takes that QR code and builds some experience around whatever it is. I mean, I could make an interactive museum with $10 and a smartphone, you know, and you get all your stuff and just put little QR tags, and you walk around and poof, there's the content right on your phone. And so anytime you can integrate technology with your environment, with AR in particular, is where you'll see these just interesting innovations that I think will catch people's attention, whether it's you know using NFTs or other blockchain technologies or interactive museums. There's all kinds of stuff, you know. And I think being creative to think outside the box and how you can use these technologies and blend them together with the cell phone, with the AR headset, with QR tags, or you know, touch screens, or with NFC tags, or NFTs, which are different. NFTs are a blockchain technology. NFCs are an RFID technology. But they're all, you can easily, with, you know, a copy of Visual Studio Code for free, write all kinds of stuff, whether it's for your phone or, you know, just, you could really, I mean, you can do anything. You just got to think of it.
Mr. Markley.
Yep. Let me just get rid of that really quickly for a hot second. But yes, definitely, there's a lot of things that can be done. As David was saying, with the technology that is out there, and even coming back to what Donald was saying earlier, I have friends that have been in that DJ space, and I'm still in that DJ space in the sense of being a radio DJ. But if you're talking about a club DJ or a DJ at events, I remember the old days when literally it was almost like an entire van that they had to come with and in order to do the setup and all of that. And now they can use something like a Newmark and basically set it up on like a little small desk and give you a full sounding dance party and all of that, and not have to have all of that big massive kind of setup that was the old way of doing things. And I'm sure that many of us remember when they had to be full crates of LPs and the whole 9 yards of the way the old DJs used to do it at a club. And now they don't even have to do that because they can literally pull the music off of the computer as well. So they can pull it and that actually make it more convenient because they may get a request for something that is not in their normal realm, but they can look it up very quickly on the internet and play it for that audience that might be part of that crowd. Like y'all were talking about earlier about Bollywood, I couldn't tell you a Bollywood song to save my life and everything. I mean, I probably could looking on Google and Dr. Google and all of that, but if I had to remember it off the top of my head, I couldn't. But if I was there with my Newmark and some of my simple system, I could look it up online and give you the music that you wanted if it was a Bollywood dance party and all of that, just by looking it up and playing it, and everybody would get on their dance floor and then get into the groove with that sound. So I think that things have become a lot more convenient and it's made it a lot more easier to do things in the market. So mobile media, as well as just media in general, is becoming much more narrow in its frame, and that is making it a lot easier and everything. I say, ironically, I was just hearing a conversation with one of the shows I'm going to do later that I'll be producing in about another 5 or 10 minutes and all, and they were talking about how it's interesting watching even people's setups, because a lot of people are wanting to get all the different toys, because sometimes people are very much wanting the latest toy, the latest mic, and the latest whatever. And there are some of us that are just very much comfortable just speaking to the computer or speaking to whatever else is going on and don't necessarily need all of the toys that are out there. But you see some people that want to go out there and get the latest and the greatest mic. But it's just like any other industry. We all know that when the car first came out and people wanted to get that first Model T, they wanted to get the fancy Model T if they could, and all along those lines. And even with the sports cars, there are folks that want to get the nice slick Jaguar, or if they're in a certain class, they might want to get the Benz and everything. Me, I just want somebody that can get me from point A to point B. I don't even mind taking the bus because I am a mass transit person and all of that. But definitely, if you want to get the slick toys, that's cool and everything. But I think there are a lot of very simple things that you can get even online, like AltSpace. We were talking about VR. You can get AltSpace and do that on your computer to create some of that virtual reality that the other gentleman was talking about when he was on here as well. So I think that it's very much becoming easier to get, and just look up the equipment that's out there. I can give you some list of ideas and stuff on a later show. None of them except for AltSpace are coming to my mind, and GarageBand, which I mentioned earlier. But it's much easier to get stuff and to do it on a successful level. And I'll just land the plane at that point and everything. But get ready to get on out of here because I've actually got to produce that other show. But as always, Dr. Sharif, great to be here with you and great to support you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. David Schumacher, what's your concluding remarks for today's session?
Well, once again, pretty interesting discussion. When I first saw the topic, mobile media, I thought, gee, that's everywhere. What's there to really talk about? But there's a lot to talk about, obviously, as we've seen in the last hour. But I want to make a prediction that's probably not too great a leap, which is the term mobile media will fade away. You won't hear people talking about mobile media anymore. It's just media. It's just content. It's just a way of disseminating that. The idea that it's mobile is what generations that are younger than myself just expect. For example, start watching a movie that's streaming on television and decide, you know what, I've got a doctor's appointment, so I shut that off And then I'm sitting in the doctor's waiting room and I pull up my smartphone with my earbuds in and continue to watch that movie while I'm waiting to be called, which always takes forever when I go to see my doctor. But the point is, it's the movie that's important, not how the movie's delivered. Whether it becomes on television, whether it's through the smartphone, whether it's through AR glasses, whatever it is, it's media, it's the content that's driving it, and there's opportunity there, and there's opportunity in how it's delivered. But it's just all one big thing going forward. So it turned out to be a very great discussion. Thanks for inviting me, Sharif.
Thank you. Mr. Donald, what's your concluding remarks for today?
Well, I completely agree with what David said, and I think that was what I've been saying all along. Like, how do you make that viral tweet? That's the question. You know, that's the content that's really the king. That's what we've always said. Content is king. One thing that comes to mind that I really hadn't been thinking about, but it actually evolves from what I was saying and thinking about, is that the economics, what I kind of described as the economics of changing uh, a mu- changing like the dynamic of being a musician in, for example, to being, as my friend that I was 100 died at 101 said, her name was Velzo Brown. She said that when I was young, if you had a party or you had a wedding, you hired a musician. You didn't have records. She said, I remember when the first records came out, somebody had a record player and we'd all go over to their house and you wouldn't put it in the background. I mean, everyone lined up their chairs so they could listen to it and they sat down and they listened to the record. It was, and now, of course, you know, we walk, I walk down the street with my earbuds on, you know, I take, you know, when I go out walking for exercise, I walk the same route a lot. And so you know, it gets boring. So I listen to music. Um, those, those kinds of, one thing to think about is the intellectual property is, um, how the intellectual property is monetized in a way. And it's worth looking at as a person. It's interested in looking at as a country, because if your intellectual property is just given away for free, if the technology creates a situation where your intellectual property is just given away for free, that can be harmful. I mean, it can be harmful. But if you create a situation where you charge too much for your intellectual property, nobody will buy it. So besides the actual like um, devices that make the digital media, the VR headsets or whatever you happen to have, um, it's very worthwhile to think about the the like who owns it and who gets paid for it, and really look at those kinds of things, as well as the physical devices themselves, and think about who is getting who, like it's really like Napster was great in a sense because I could get any music for free. But on the other hand, all of the musicians who were living off of the record sales, they were they were they were wiped out. And so anytime when these technologies are coming along, it's worthwhile to look both at the technology and like who is gaining and who is losing from it, and keep that really in mind, because it isn't just musicians. It's software designers. It's all manner of people are going to be winners and losers as these things change. And I think that's one of the more, I think that's something that every country and every person really needs to think about.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. This is really great discussion, especially for our audience. Tomorrow we have a debate on healthcare system. So hopefully we will get a lot of different speakers who can contribute for this debate. Thank you, Mr. David Schumacher. Thank you, Mr. Donald, for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.